I challenged myself to beat the final boss of this level without actually attacking him a single time. You see, one of my favorite characters in Mortal Rite, Dawksin, has this passive where all of his attacks leave shrapnel embedded in their targets. So I decided to try and build up enough shrapnel on all the enemies on the level and then use the Coalesce ability, which transfers half of all the shrapnel from nearby enemies to your current target on Kodar, the final boss, and just use one recall ability to rip all the shrapnel out, killing him instantly. The tricky part about this is that if an enemy dies with shrapnel in them, that shrapnel is lost. So I'll have to be super careful to keep enemies alive all the way until the end. So the problem with my initial run was that the Coalesce ability actually has a really long animation, and I didn't have enough health to be able to tank hits while using it in the middle of a crowd. I also had an issue where I would accidentally use recall because it was in my first ability slot. So for my second round of attempts, I moved recall to the last slot so I wouldn't accidentally press the button. And then I used my available gold to craft 9 Vitalis lanterns for more health at the blacksmith. However, while these attempts were better, I found that I would still die too quickly because I was so focused on the shrapnel and health numbers of all the enemies that I was doing a bad job at surviving myself. So for run number 3, I added the shrapnel wave ability because it allows me to more easily apply a bunch of shrapnel to a wide group of enemies. And I also got the slowing wave upgrade for it, which will slow down enemies hit by the shrapnel wave for 3 seconds, with the idea being that it would give me more time to think during all that chaos. I also got Dawksin's wounding deflect passive, which applies 13 shrapnel to an enemy after a successful deflect. And I got his crippling blades passive, which decreases Dawksin's damage by 10%, but increases his shrapnel by 30%, which is definitely a trade-off that works very well for this build. I also went back to a previous level so I could farm up some enemies to gain some extra gold, so I could craft Blood Thief Fangs and Sap of the Life Tree, 2 items that steal health from enemies on every successful melee attack. And so while this run was better, it was still difficult because these 2 groups of enemies here at the start of the level are on different factions. And so because the enemies were constantly trying to kill each other, it was tough to fully control the fight and keep moving shrapnel safely to the enemy with the most health. So for my next runs, I decided that before every attempt, I would defeat the training dummy in the refuge so I could start each run with full focus, making it a bit easier to control the fight from the start. However, once I had cleared the first group of enemies and just had 1 cultist left, absolutely loaded up with shrapnel, I wasn't able to balance protecting the cultist from the rest of the enemies level and staying close enough to him so he wouldn't despawn. So I came up with this new strategy where I would sneak past the first group and instead take out the entire camp of enemies on the back half of the map. Then I went back to the first group, took them all out while loading up 1 cultist with as much shrapnel as possible. But as I kited the cultist over to Kodar, I had to parry him about 150 times in order to build up enough shrapnel from Dawksin's wounding deflect passive. But eventually I just managed to do it. I was getting very low on health. And after 2 uses of the Coalesce ability, there was just enough shrapnel on the final boss to take him out with 1 big recall. Let's go! Bang!